Hi, it's Paul Banis of GreatDad.com, and thank you very much for joining either the podcast or the YouTube version of the podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you took just a second to subscribe either on your podcast app or in YouTube. It doesn't really do anything. It's not going to send you any emails. It's just going to show up more often on your feed, and it does me a lot of good in terms of getting more exposure for this work I do to support dads. I'd also like to invite you to come to my page, GreatDad.com/go, if you'd like to discuss more about any of the issues that we are covering within the podcast, especially if there's any way I can help you to be a sounding board in your own struggles to be a dad and to be there for your family. So take a look at that. It also includes a link to my course on gratitude, where at GreatDad.com/gratitude with a offer to take that course for free. So see you in a second. Hey, it's Paul Banis with GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series talking to dads about modern fatherhood. And I've got a dad who's a little bit more in my generation with grown kids, but we're going to talk about the role and value of meditation in parenting. So welcome, Bob Barton.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm really
parenting is such a big skill.
Yeah. I've come to learn how valuable meditation is in it. And you and I chatted for just a second about that. But let's start back. What led you to get into meditation? Because you're a lawyer by trade. You teach some courses on law now. You're very successful. I imagine fairly high powered. You had very large clients, and kind of midlife, you found out about meditation. Was that more due to family life or because of the high stress of your work?
It was more due to family life.
Yeah.
I was representing in Miami. The mob consists of Colombians and Cubans and Haitians and Peruvians and Italians, and I was circulating at that level. And quite frankly, I was hanging out with them a little too much. It was the cocaine cowboy days for a reason. And I was doing too much. I was partaking too much and going to the discos and hanging out. Meanwhile, my personal life was falling apart. I had a kid who was becoming anorexic. I had another who was the lost child. I had an alcoholic wife who had alcoholic parents, and I was a workaholic cocaine snorter. So
Wow.
it was falling apart.
Well, I'm glad you got out of that and got help. And you first you went to a therapist, and then you were introduced
I
to.
did. And I came to a big, important crossroads in life. And I asked him if he would tell me which way to go, which no therapist will ever do that. But what
Yeah.
he did was he pulled out some coins and started throwing them on the table and making some calculations. And I was getting more and more pissed off because I'm paying him to be my therapist and he's turning into a soothsayer. Uh, and but it was a Taoist practice, and eventually he came up with a number and opened up a book to that number, and the title of the chapter was Retreat. And the book said it was time for me to retreat. And although I was pissed off and stormed out, it was the right advice. And I started to pull back from some of those excessive behaviors. And, there's the old expression, when mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, but it goes for dad too. When daddy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And I wasn't very happy. And I started to find out, what the essence of happiness was. And so my therapist was actually a student and the English language editor of, dig this, a 72nd generation Taoist master. In other words, for 1,400 years, the wisdom had been passed down in his family.
Wow.
It's hard to wrap your head around that. And when I met him, I don't want to sound maudlin, but it was one of those things where you just want to throw yourself at his feet and say, teach me everything you got.
Well,
he taught.
I don't know a lot about Taoism, but that part is intriguing. Is kind of the idea of like taking a random number and going to a page and seeing something and not even knowing what that word means or what it means to you, but you then melding your personal experience with that word retreat and then working from there.
Yeah. Well, the practice of the I Ching, a lot of people think that it's an oracle, but it's not.
Right, right,
Carl Jung analyzed it and wrote some wonderful papers. And basically, what the I Ching is, it is a method of creating a bridge between your intuitive intelligence, which is not verbal, and your verbal intelligence. And the thing about throwing the coins is not magical. It's just a way of occupying the rational part of your mind, the mathematical part of your mind, so that you can ask a question and the intuitive part of your mind can actually answer it. And then you are led to do a certain reading, and your eyes pick out of the reading the words that your intuitive brain wants to communicate to your rational brain. It's really nothing more than a device of bringing up from inside the knowledge that you already have
right.
and just making it usable.
It's
And
so,
it's 4,000 years old, and it's incredible.
it is so interesting to me. Last night I went to a symposium about using psychedelics for treatment, and they talked about
Mm-hmm.
something that's, I mean, not to get off on that track, but about the fact that the subconscious is so difficult to access, and psychedelics have a role to play in or
Right.
gaining acceptance as a way to get into that subconscious, but much the same way as ink blots are, or what you're talking
Right.
about. It's a way
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
get away from that rational, what literally is in front of me to what's
Mm-hmm.
deeper
It,
inside.
it, it's so true because when most of the questions that we have in life, if you think about it and you give yourself a little space, you realize that you already know the answer. You already know the right thing to do. We intuitively we know. A lot of times we cover it up with our conditioning, or we cover it up with our emotion, or we cover it up with I wants or I don't likes. But really, if you give yourself the moment, just a moment to allow it to come up, you find that you already really know the answer.
Hmm.
You ask a question like, what do I need to know about my job interview this afternoon? You really know the answer. And we all really know the answer to that. It's just that our freaking out and our nervousness gets in the way. And it's kind of the same way with parenting. Most often with parenting, we really know where the boundaries need to be, and we really know that we need to give our kids the opportunity to explore and experiment. And sometimes we just, our sense of protection or our sense of fear or whatever else, it just kind of gets in the way. And if we can take the time to allow that to move out of the way and do what our intuitive intelligence tells us is the right thing, it's not always right, but it's right a lot, an awful lot.
Yeah, you said something very interesting to me before we got on about how at that point where you still had youngish kids in the
Mm-hmm.
house, and you were usually using this mostly to treat yourself, you still got this burst of wisdom from this teaching of meditation
Uh-huh.
that was useful in terms of raising the kids. And
Right. Well, one of the great tenets of Taoism is that there is a natural order of things, and everything has a natural timing. And that timing is very, very important. As Master Nee once said to me, you can pull an apple off a tree and struggle and twist and sweat, and it's sour. And you can wait too long and it drops and rots. But if you pick it at the right time, it comes off easy and it's sweet. And
Mhm.
so the purpose of Taoism, the teaching of Taoism and the practice is like Tai Chi. The Tai Chi is just a physical example of sometimes it's time to move forward and sometimes it's time to hold back. And that whole forward and back is part of that cycling of life. As day turns to night and night turns to day, there's a time to advance and a time to retreat. There's a time to be loud and a time to be quiet. And the whole key to living a wise life is getting sensitive and accurately understanding what the time is and then aligning yourself with it.
Mhm.
So if it's a time to move forward, if you're out in the ocean and the tide's going with you, hey man, swim like heck. But when the tide turns around and goes against you, don't waste your energy fighting it. Don't let yourself be swept out to sea. Use the amount of energy necessary to hold your position. And that way you're being effective, you're being efficient, you're interfering the least possible, and you wait and have patience. And when it's time to move forward again, swim like heck and then hold, and swim like heck and then hold. And so if you learn to ride the waves of energy that we have between ourselves and our dynamics and our children, you notice that even in your relationship with your children, there are times when you're effective and times when they don't want to listen to you.
Right.
There are times when they need your advice and there's times when they don't want it. So if it's one of those times when they don't want your advice, don't fight them over it. Just
Yeah, well, I
hold.
think that's something that's very important in relationships. I mean, not only with our kids, but with our partners as well, is this
Sure.
whole idea of, I think what you're getting at is kind of knowing when to kind of go with the flow. And
Right,
the fact that they didn't take out the garbage or whatever, is that a fight? Is that a fight, or is a point you have to make, or do you just let it go? And I think we all kind of wrestle with that because we're always, especially with our kids, we don't want them to fall into bad habits. We want to try to correct things, and we don't want them to become lazy. There are all kinds of things
right,
going on in our
right,
minds,
right.
all these things that we want to fight and correct and everything else. But we quite often, don't we think we often, or at least I know I did, like guilty
Yeah,
like everybody else is fighting over the wrong things and
right.
not struggling with the ones that maybe were the most important.
You're absolutely right. And I had another conversation recently where I mentioned that there's a time to advance and there's a time to retreat. And the fellow that I was speaking with took a little bit of umbrage at that because he said, well, if you retreat, then you're just surrendering and giving up.
Oh,
And that is not a good thing, when you want to move forward with your career or whatever else. And I said, well, here's what you missed. If you're retreating because you have to give up, then you missed the right time to retreat, because you missed it when you went by it, you passed it by, because there was a time to retreat when you could have retreated and regrouped, but you missed it, and now you let it progress to chaos, and now you have to retreat and surrender. But it's
right.
because you missed the moment of effective retreat. So the key to life is knowing when to move forward and when to not. So an example you gave, when are you strict and when do you let it go? Yeah, it's tough stuff. Those are hard things, and you will make plenty of mistakes. And I
Right.
think it's okay, but I think what's also important is to be vulnerable and authentic with your kids and let them know that you can make mistakes too.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have pushed you then, you're right. And that's an important piece of it. I think we spend so much energy trying to protect ourselves from our vulnerability, and we don't realize that by dropping the shields and just saying, hey man, I am what I am and I is what I is, and I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, and take it or leave it, and this is who I am. You drop all the shields, you save all that energy, and you get more respect.
Hmm.
At the same time, people appreciate your authenticity. And that's what I mean. You interfere the least and have the greatest impact by actually being more vulnerable.
What does that look like in terms of, like, if it's with a child or with a spouse? I think a lot of men get into trouble with their spouses because they feel like they have to be strong and they have to stand up for what they want and they're not going to agree, and the next thing you know, you got two people, the old "it takes two to tango" or "it takes two to tangle" or whatever it is, and you ratchet it up. But how do you know when to, or what to say in that thing? Is it a matter of just saying, "Hey, I'm lost here too. I don't, you're expressing a concern and anger, and I I don't know what the answer is. I'm lost here with you.
Yeah,
How do we go forward?
yeah. So we have a little expression that my wife and I have adopted, and it's, "Hey, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?"
Yeah. Well, I know what my wife would say. She wants to be right
You know,
and
it's,
happy.
and my wife, she doesn't. She went to one of my meditation classes once and said she'd never go again because that's just not her. She's type A, very task oriented, very detail oriented, and I bless her for it because without it
Yeah.
I'd be drowning. And The other day, she came and I heard that there was some upset in her. She wasn't sharing with me, and I finally I asked her. It seems to me that you're a little low energy. Tell me what's going on. So finally, she started sharing with me, and it was a bunch of complaints about my behavior, especially my, I thought we would have some time together, and now you're doing podcasts, and you have a podcast at 3 o'clock, and we have to run home, and this blah blah blah, and she now without the trading, without the contemplation, I would have explained to her where her facts were wrong
Right.
and where she does the same thing.
Right.
And we would have gotten into, who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
With the trading, I just listened to her.
Mm.
I let her go on and on and on. And she blew herself, she blew herself out. She said everything that she wanted to say, and then I just stayed quiet for a couple more seconds, and then she got on to doing something like making that reservation or doing something non-emotional,
Mhm.
getting into it. I mean, she got her emotions out, and then we had that conversation. And truthfully, I'm left with a little bit of I want to tell her my side of the
Right.
story.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
that I
You're
have
human.
that
Yeah.
I have that in me,
Yeah.
you know. But one of the things about meditation that is so helpful in life is that when I feel that and see that thought in me, and I have that thought, I didn't get to say my side of the story. Meditation teaches us that we're not our thoughts. We are the creator of our thoughts. In the moment I recognize, hey, I didn't get to tell my side of the story, is simply a thought that I have. It's not me.
Right.
It's just a thought I'm having. Then all of a sudden, I don't have to get emotional about it because I'm the creator of that thought. And I also know that 5 seconds or 10 seconds from now, that thought's going to be gone. And it's going to be replaced by some other thought, but it will be gone and it won't bother me anymore. And so that's what we do in meditation. We watch our thoughts arise and exist and float away and float away. And that's what they do there. We're not, that's the big lesson of meditation. It's not about quieting the mind. Everybody says, I can't meditate because I can't quiet the mind. I don't quiet my mind either. My mind, after 20 years, my mind goes crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, not a problem. But the difference is that I am not going crazy. My thoughts are going crazy, and I am watching them go crazy. And even though I am on the roller coaster of the craziness, at the same time, there's a piece of me that's watching me be on the roller coaster of the
Mm.
craziness. And from the place of watching me be on that roller coaster, I'm not on the roller coaster.
So what would you say to people who understand what you're saying, but they still hold on to some of those events and resent them? Does meditation have a role of calming the resentment or letting the resentment go that builds up quite often? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
with kids or with partners?
Yeah. What you resist persists. What you resist persists.
Mm.
And what you can be with will let you be. And what most of us do, and what is the natural thing for us to do, is that when we have a resentment, we either get into the resentment and build it up until we have to go yell at somebody,
Yeah.
which is playing the game of blow up, which, anything wrong with you, honey? Oh, no, everything's fine. No, it's fine. Fine. Next day, is anything wrong with you? Man, nothing fine. Then finally you go, you want to know what's wrong with me? I'm going to tell you what's wrong with me. And then, you know, so you build up all of the stuff until you puke. So that's one way we handle it. And the other one is that we try to suppress it. We try to not feel it. You can't do that. You can't stop yourself from thinking things. You can't suppress. I mean, maybe you can suppress the thinking, but it goes into your guts and it gives you indigestion and rips your insides apart. So, I mean, literally, people die early. They have all kinds of digestive diseases from that. You can do that. What you do, what the very counterintuitive thing is that you allow it to be. What you resist persists, but what you can be with will let you be. So you notice it. And this is where the difference between living and meditating is.
Mm-hmm.
In living, we just become upset and then we are upset. In meditating, we become upset and we watch our upset and we allow it to be. We might even become curious about it. You know, Paul, I am sure that you've had the experience of being in a conversation with somebody and at the same moment you're thinking, this isn't going very well, or, oh, I really like the way I said that, right? So that's metacognition. That's a facility that human beings have of thinking about our thinking. Mm-hmm. We have that facility. And when you do it in your everyday life, when you're doing something and you're thinking, oh, this is going well, I'm making good points, whatever you're thinking, it's just happening and it doesn't give you any great benefit.
Right. There's no insight attached to that. It's just
the only difference between that and meditation is that when we meditate, all of a sudden we become intentionally aware of the thinking of our thinking. And now it starts to have a benefit because I've raised it to the level of my consciousness. I've given it importance, the thinking of my thinking. And once I do that, I very quickly am given the experiential knowledge that I'm not my thoughts. Mm-hmm. One thing for me to tell you, we're not our thoughts,
right?
And we can step outside our thoughts. It's completely different from you having the experience of watching yourself going down a river on a log and being up on the bank watching yourself going down the river on the log. Now, the river might turn into white water. It might turn into a waterfall. It might turn into a flood and sweep your house away. But still, from watching it up on the bank, there's a certain stability and a peacefulness. So when people talk about the stability and peacefulness of meditation, they're not talking about permanently being on a calm, sweet river. Because our minds are gonna go through all of the roller coasters. Mm-hmm. It's the peacefulness that comes from the watching, and that process of becoming more familiar with the watcher, with the observer. Right now, we're completely disconnected from it. Yeah. But if we do a simple exercise of allowing the watcher to come forward, we start to reconnect with it. We start to get familiar with that person. And then we develop the skill, which is a learned skill. We develop the skill of being able to move into that observer state at will. Yeah. So in your question about how I deal with my wife, you know, I start to notice I'm getting upset and that I am on the log. Mm-hmm. And that I'm getting upset. And then I sense and I notice that I am getting upset. I'm intentional, I'm aware of it. And I move into that observer state and I, from a distance, begin to watch the entire conversation. Yeah. And then I may decide that I handled it well and I may decide that I didn't handle it so well. But for sure, the next time it happens, I'll probably handle it better.
Yeah, so this is very interesting, I think, for younger men. I came upon meditation and more of this introspection kind of more in midlife, like you did in my late 30s, and kind of
Mhm.
never really understood it until then. And I think it's I think it's harder as a younger person for whatever reason, like, to understand this value of the introspection. That's not It's a different type of introspection than the usual kind of oh, woe is me, or I'm having a rough day, or I'm frustrated, or whatever.
Mhm.
But it's more of that, like you're saying, this almost a third party examination out
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
curiosity rather than out of disgust or disappointment and self-hatred and all the other stressors that we can have.
Yes,
Um,
sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Many people will say to me, "Well, I do that all the time. I,
yeah,
don't-
right,
I do that all the time. I'm always thinking about, that what kind of a
right,
day." And all I say to that is, "Yes, you do, and that is happening to you.
right, right,
And the
right,
difference is that it's happening with you.
right.
When you're with it, it's different from something that's happening to you on auto drive, which you really have no say in the
Yeah,
matter.
yeah,
When you're observing your thinking intentionally, you actually have some say in the matter,
right.
which gives you actually the freedom to recreate your life exactly the way you want it to be, in spite of all of the conditioning that's been dumped on us.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is really powerful. I do a course on positive intelligence, which really
Uh-huh.
starts off from the whole aspect of actually recognizing you're in this state, and and just the fact of recognizing it, that
Mm-hmm.
you're being amped up by some outside force, inner force of your surroundings being all messed up in your mind, and that's the starting point of changing the way to that
Yeah.
uh, more positively than if you were
Mm-hmm.
just fight or flight,
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
reacting out of a pure emotion.
Yeah. It's it it's
So,
so simple. Uh, it,
so
I like Sharon Salzberg, one of my great teachers, once said, meditation's not hard. Remembering to do it is hard.
yeah. Well, you talk about that in you've got a free ebook, and I guess I think it's a lot of that also is on your website, just as
Uh-huh.
one of the pages on the website about the importance of meditating at a certain point of the day, and consistency is being really important, maybe for that reason.
Mhm. For that reason, a
Right.
lot of people ask me, when's the best time to meditate? And my answer always is, it's the best time to meditate is that time of the day when you can commit to doing it at that time of the day.
Yeah.
If for you, it might be noon, or it might be one. For me, it's 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Because my feeling, I I take great ownership in the morning. I own the morning.
Well,
Now,
at 5 o'clock, you probably do.
I do. I own it. Now, once my wife wakes up, I don't own anything.
Yeah. So
um,
what you're now you've been working at this in parallel with your law career for the last 30 plus years, doing investigating about meditation, the value of meditation. And that you're now you teach courses in a school of meditation called Koru. Is that
yes, yes.
yes?
Uh, so I retired from the law. I do pro bono work now, but I retired from a career in law uh, a decade, 10 years ago now. But yeah, Koru. Take a second with Koru. So at Duke University, they were very concerned about the anxiety level of their students.
Hmm.
And so the counseling and the psychology department and the statistics department and a bunch of other people decided to form a little group and come up with how can, because now my training to become a teacher was classic Tibetan training, 2 years of sitting 30 minutes every single day and logging it and meeting once a week
Mm.
and going to 4 retreats a year. And it was intense. But how can we present meditation to the Western mind and we want an answer right away. We want the magic wand. How can we find a way of doing that we could present it in a way that people say, hey, I can do that. I'll do that. I can do that. So they worked on it for several years. And then once they came up with the methodology, they researched it for several years. And so this is actually evidence-based, and it is proven to be effective, and it's a wonderful thing. They developed an entire digital infrastructure. And so most people, when they go to learn meditation, either they'll go and get a coach, and they'll meet with that coach once a week, and they'll get some learning that week, and then they go home and make all kinds of, develop all kinds of bad habits for the week, and then try to correct them at the end of the week.
Right.
Or they get an app,
Mm-hmm.
and then they try to learn from the app or the book. Koru gives you both. This is so unique. In Koru, you have an app and you have a teacher, me. And we meet for an hour and a half once a week, either on Zoom or in person, either in group or individually. And we talk about what we're going to practice the next week. Next week we're going to do belly breathing and body scans and walking meditation. So those three, we're going to practice those next week. And we'll talk about the week before and any obstacles and whatever comes up. And then you get the app and you go home, and those practices are on the app.
Mm-hmm.
And you listen to the practice, and as soon as it's done, a log pops up on the app, and you're asked to write in what that was like for you, what that 10 minutes was like for you. Now, that log comes to my dashboard. When I get up, I actually get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And after I do my routines, I sit down with my students' logs every single day, 7 days a week for 5 weeks. And I read their logs and I type them back a response. And that goes back to their app. And then the next day, when they're going to do their 10 minutes of practice, my coaching comes up first. So every single day we're in dialogue.
Wow.
Every single day for 5 weeks. And they might send me a log that says, oh, this was a terrible meditation. There was a dog barking, and all I could do was listen to the dog barking. And I kept wanting to listen to the guidance, but I found that I couldn't. And all I could pay attention to was the barking. And then all of a sudden it was over and I didn't meditate at all. That might be a log. And I get that. And I say, well, you think that was terrible.
Right.
But look at all of the data that you learned about yourself in terms of how distractions affect you. Now you have a better idea that what it feels like to be distracted. You also kind of noticed that time compressed for you. You got distracted, and then all of a sudden it was over. So there's something about the effect that it has on time. And there's something about this. So look at all of the information that you got about how you work. What wonderful stuff that was. That was great. That was a great learning experience. A lot of great data.
Yeah.
Good work. And they get that on their app that day. And for the first 2 weeks, I promise you, all my students, they talk about nothing but I couldn't maintain focus. I couldn't concentrate. And for 2 weeks, it's like getting in with a pry, and I'm prying them away from those words. It's not about the focus. It's not about concentrating, because, Paul, I'm going to tell you, here is what helps people to understand. When you meditate, although you say that your goal is to pay attention to the candle, okay, that's not where the healing occurs. The healing occurs in noticing that your mind has wandered and waking up and going, oh, right, I said I wanted to pay attention to the candle and I'm not doing it. Then there'll be a flood of judgments. I should have been, I'm doing it wrong, blah, blah, blah. Then they'll quiet down, and then you begin again.
Right.
And then your mind goes off, and then you come back and begin again. And your mind goes off, and you come back and you begin again. And what this little practice teaches you, it teaches you the difference between being in a fog of rumination and projection and what it feels like to wake up and what it feels like to attend to your thoughts and what it feels like to be an observer of your thoughts. And by starting again, you're learning about how to allow for your faults and you're developing a tolerance for discomfort. You don't want to. You want to think I failed and you want to go away, but you're
Yeah.
not. So
Do
you
you think
develop,
is that your mind telling you give this up? Don't do
yes,
this anymore? Yeah.
yes. And
Let
your
me
mind,
let me go back take
yeah,
over control of you.
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Right. That's what your mind. And you're learning that you're not your mind.
Right.
And so with this little practice, all of these wonderful things are happening. And after about 2 weeks, I see in their logs, oh, now I understand what you're saying about, yeah, now I get, oh, there was this one girl who was terribly emotional. It's a long story, but it turned out that she was actually not engaging in the course, even though she voluntarily decided to take it, because ultimately, at a deep level, she felt she didn't deserve to be happy.
Mm.
And we sat down and we had a conversation, and she was able to locate, and I don't know why, but she was able to locate a place in her body where she physically had the emotion that she had, which was like 3 inches underneath her left collarbone.
Mhm.
And she also was able to say the words that went through her mind. Well, after we were having this conversation, I mentioned to her, I said, look at this. You're not being emotional now. A minute ago, you were crying unstoppably. Now we're having an academic conversation. And why? Because you're not in the past thinking about all of the times that you sabotage yourself. And you're not catastrophizing that the rest of your life is going to be like that. You're thinking about a body sensation, which means that you're here right now
Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
realizing that there is nothing that is happening right now that is a cause for you to be upset.
Yeah.
And it was like the heavens had opened up. She goes, that's what you mean about being in the present moment. I go, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
magical. There's nothing magical about it. It's just you're paying attention to something that's happening right now. And
Yeah.
right now, you're not sabotaging yourself. And she wrote me this beautiful reflection at the end of the course. It was 5 pages long. Usually they're one page, 5 pages. And for the rest of her life, she's going to have that now. She's going to develop that skill, of recognizing that I can come to the present moment and I can be okay.
So there's just so much to be gained out of this, and we know so much more about the brain. I actually use among this positive intelligence things, also use an app, sets up meditation in a different way. We're all, I mean, even in modern religion, you talk a lot about your religious experience with your wife. And
Right,
I
right.
don't want to get off on that tangent because that's another whole angle. But we know so much more about the brain now, and I use actually an EEG headband with a program called Muse that helps it interprets your brain waves at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. But what's been interesting to me is how it differentiates between what is actual calm versus sleepiness. Like
Mm-hmm.
falling into unconsciousness is not the same thing as mindfulness. You may feel like you've let it all go, but that's not the same thing as mindfulness.
Right.
It's just really interesting. I guess my worry is that somebody listening to this might think, "Oh, this just sounds so woo woo that I can't really, you know, get into it." I mean, here you are a lawyer, very rational person who's taken this on and seen the benefits. How do you explain this to people who maybe have a very much like I got my life under control. I'm a very rational human being. I don't need this kind of thing, and yet it works for so many people, and we know more about it now that seems to add a layer of scientific proof on top of it.
Yeah. So the first question I would ask is, so how's that working out for you?
Yeah, right.
So if you need to get into the science of it, I generally will refer back to some of the evolutionary stuff that we know. And we know that when we were, for 1.7 million years, we were hunter-gatherers, and our basic body and our mind has evolved for the hunter-gatherer environment, which is a lot of heavy physical work. There's a lot of physical work, and it's a lot and very low density caloric intake. I mean, we were eating wild onions and berries, and for the every once in a while you'd get a wild boar and you'd feast, and then but for the most part it was a very low density caloric intake, and we worked very hard. We were traveling all day and moving and and so today we sit on our butts all day and we go to McDonald's and have a Happy Meal, and we get more salt and sugar than we get in the jungle in a month, and we wonder why there is an obesity epidemic. Well, it's because our bodies were evolved to desire salt and sugar and fat because they're so rare in the jungle and they're so dense that it was an important nutrient. And so we would try to find them. But now when it's just offered to you at a McDonald's Happy Meal, you'll have one and you have another and you have another and you have another. And it's not right for our body. And so we become obese and we have all this chronic illness. We don't do enough physical exercise. Can you imagine what the caveman would think if he was looking at somebody in a gym pushing iron? They would probably go, why are you doing that? I mean, you're moving rocks around in the jungle. Isn't that enough work?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you got to lift weights for? So we understand it from a body perspective, but we don't understand it from the mind's perspective. And our mind also was designed for that environment. That idea that our mind wanders and goes crazy, it's not doing that to annoy us. It's doing that because in the jungle, you had to scan for danger all the time. There were snakes and there were poisonous beetles and there were tigers and there were things that would fall out of the trees on you. You had to be always aware of your environment. And so for that environment, the scanning works perfectly. But in our environment, when our tiger is a deadline and the snake is having money to pay the bills and all of these other modern things that stress us out, which we can't really identify, and they've all faded into a kind of chronic, undefinable mash of things that are in effect attacking us, because physiologically stress is the same thing as being attacked. Cortisol drops into your body and it literally dissolves the coating on your nervous system. The dopamine and everything else. Now, the way that the cavemen, the way they balanced it off is at night they ate and they sat around and they told stories about the stars, and the fire was there, and they rested and digested, and they became creative, and that's when the art came out and all of the legends and the stories and all of that stuff. That was the balance that they had in life. They worked their asses off during the day and they sat around the fire and they connected at night. But life isn't like that for us anymore. And so we have the world will send at us a lot of stuff that activates the flight response, the stress response.
Mm-hmm.
The news, a plane crashing, the motor light coming on our dashboard. Just it's throwing all this stuff at us all the time. And this side of our brain, which is where it's housed, is like going bananas. This side of the brain, where our rest and digest, our sense of connectivity, our spirituality, our sense of creativity is housed, it's not being stimulated. And so naturally, we start feeling overwhelmed. We start feeling unbalanced. We start feeling like we're going down a hole. And then, of course, as a parent, we start taking it out on our kids. And, and the whole thing. So the key is, a lot of times people say, well, what's the thing? What we have to do is we have a responsibility to joy. We have a responsibility to intentionally build up the electrical activity in the left side of the brain to balance out the right side, because the brain science has taught us that we cannot reduce the energy over here. It can't be done. We can't intentionally make it less active, but we can balance it by building up the left side. And so if people want to know, does this work? I would say, if you want to feel out of balance, then that's generally what happens. If you when you go on vacation and you're sitting in the chaise lounge and you're watching the ocean and you've got the Mai Tai in your hand and you feel like all of the world is right and good, that's because you're operating left side. If you don't have that as a regular response in your life, you are going to be digging down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And so you've got to do that. And so there are ways to intentionally activate the left side. And that's why it works. This is one of the ways that the brain scan, I don't care whether you believe it or not, you can look at a brain scan and you can see that when somebody meditates, it shows up on the brain scan. So there's your proof. I don't know, I can't explain to you why it works, but there's the proof. Also, I mean, you have to curate your environment. If there was that wonderful time when you had that wonderful conversation with your son in the rowboat up on Lake Titicaca when you were doing a portage across some, god awful isthmus or something, and you just learned that your son was capable of doing something, and that brought a beat to your heart, and put a picture of it on your desk. Remind yourself of that moment from time to time. You've got to put that stuff in your environment to balance your life out, because when you're happy, like when dad ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Well, that is really good advice. I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. I think if you're in crisis, this is good. If you're not in crisis, it's good. There's just nothing bad to be said about devoting some 5, 10, 15. Some people meditate for an hour a day because they see such a benefit to it.
And it's not necessary. 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
The consistency is the most important thing that I find. Ideally, at the same time every day can really change your outlook throughout the day. This is really good. I really I encourage people to take a look at your website, A Wise and Happy Life, and you've got some information about what meditation is, how it is different, and then the link to your services if people want to look at this Karoo method with you, which I find very interesting. I'll have to look at the app myself because I'm intrigued by that mixture of something that helps prompt you and keeps you on schedule. And even though, you're not going to be with your coach all the time, but there is a way that can keep you on track. Right. And like we say, consistency is key. So A Wise and Happy Life. Bob Martin, thanks again for joining me today. It's an inspiration to me to keep on going, even though Paul, I've been doing it for a little while as well.
I have to thank you for, even creating the platform that lets people like me. I mean, my passion is to spread the word about meditation, and your platform gives me the opportunity to do that. So with great heartfelt thanks for the effort that it takes to put a podcast together. Kudos to you.
Well, it's all about supporting dads. My whole mission is try to really promote involved parenting by fathers. This is one way. One way is to be when you're with your kids. That's great. First step is to be with your kids as much as you can, but also when you're with them, be mindful that you are with them and it's not a time for other distractions. Focus on them, and that's part of what this is all about.
Right. God bless you.
Okay, so Paul Banis of GreatDad.com. You can find my coaching at GreatDad.com/go, along with a free course on gratitude and some other things, as well as this positive intelligence course that I mentioned as well. Until next time, stay strong.